Hello and welcome, I'm your code monkey. So there's a term that's becoming quite popular right now. It is called vibe coding, and yep, it has been growing in interest lately. Only for some reason it's really popular in China, then Israel, Singapore, and finally the US. There's an interesting article on Ars Technica, and a video with a very interesting title from Y Combinator, and the whole thing basically started on this post. If you want to learn, then check out my free complete courses. I highly recommend you go through my C# complete course. This one covers pretty much everything from the language, everything from beginner to intermediate to the advanced topics. Or for something recent, check out my dots course. This is a very advanced toolset, but if you are on the intermediate or advanced stage, this is something I highly recommend you learn about. Or in general, a great game for beginners is my Kitchen Chaos course. Also, if you want to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry, check out my Game Dev Report newsletter. This is a free newsletter where I cover the latest game dev news and any interesting articles that I come across. Things like a really awesome free VFX Unity ebook. I also wrote about how a janky game made $28 million, or how much money do Steam developers actually keep. And I also write about some fun topics, like this trend where developers were posting their before and after, showing a really impressive result. So if you want to stay up to date, sign up for free with a link in the description. It's from Andrei Karpathy. He was director of AI at Tesla, founding team at OpenAI. So here it says, there's a new kind of coding I like to call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget the code even exists. It's possible because the LLMs, Curse Composer with Sonnet, are getting too good. Also, I just talked to Composer with Super Whisper, so I barely even touch the keyboard. I asked for the dumbest things, like decrease the padding on the sidebar by half, because I'm way too lazy to find it. I accept all always. I don't read diffs anymore. When I get error messages, I just copy paste them with no comment. Usually that fixes it. The code grows beyond my usual comprehension. I'd have to really read through for a while. Sometimes LLMs can't fix a bug, so I just work around it or ask for random changes until it goes away. It's not too bad for throwaway weekend projects, but still quite amusing. I'm building a project or web app, but it's not really coding. I just see stuff, say stuff, run stuff, copy paste stuff, and mostly works. So yeah, for me, personally, I do find this very strange, a very weird, very inefficient way of coding. Basically, the whole idea is you just talk to an AI, you tell it, build me something, build me some code, then just accept whatever the AI gives you and just assume that it works. If it doesn't work, then you ask the AI again, the AI is going to generate something else, then you take it, accept it, assume that it works, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So basically this to me honestly feels kind of insane, because basically feels like you're playing at a casino. Basically you're constantly pulling levers on a slot machine. Sometimes the AI gives you something that works and sometimes doesn't. And when it gives you something that doesn't work, your only option is just to pull the lever once again, get another one, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. So that to me, I have to say that sounds pretty insane. For me, one of the things that I love most about programming is how it's actually deterministic, meaning the exact same code will always yield the exact same output. So I like the fact that if I know how to write some code, I can erase it, write it again, and it won't work. Whereas this whole thing, basically based on randomness, basically based on the randomness of the slot machine, that goes pretty much counter to everything that I know about programming. And the whole thing of when I get error messages, I just copy paste them with no comment, usually that fixes it. Once again, that sounds insane to me. The idea that you wrote, quote unquote, some code, but of course you didn't write it, so you have no idea what it's doing. So when you have an error, once again, your only option is just to go back to the slot machine, pull the lever, get another spin, and maybe it will fix it, maybe it won't. And if it doesn't fix it, your only option is, once again, to pull the lever again, because you don't know what the code is doing, so you yourself have no skill of being able to actually fix it. And then sometimes LLMs can't fix a bug, so I just work around it or ask for random changes until it goes away. So yeah, the whole thing, vibe coding, seems to be all based on randomness. So I guess if you want to feel like you have zero control over your project, zero control over your code, so it's basically just putting your code in the hands of randomness, and your only hope is to hope that something actually works. Like it says here, it's not too bad for throwaway weekend projects. In that sense, I can sort of kind of understand it. If you have something that is very, very limited, something that you want to do that is very, very simple, when it's something that is literally just a throwaway project that you want to do just to test out, something that is very, very tiny, for that I can understand, because you don't really care what the code is doing, you just care that it does the thing that you want to do. But it definitely seems insane to me once you add just a tiny bit of complexity. Basically, the more complex you add, the more randomness you're going to need to. So maybe if it's a small thing, you can just ask ChatGPT, and let's say 80% of the time it's going to give you a good small code snippet that actually works. But as the project grows in complexity, I would assume at some point it becomes like 1% chance. So you've got to prompt the AI 100 times to get just one time that things might actually work. So yeah, this to me, vibe coding does seem quite insane. Like I said, personally, I'm a big fan of knowing what the code is actually doing. Like I said, one of the things that I love is how code is deterministic. The exact same code will always yield the exact same results. That's honestly one of the things that drives me crazy when I answer comments in my videos. When someone is saying, I copied the exact same code and it doesn't work, that drives me insane because that is not possible. If you write the exact same code, you have to get the exact same results. And of course, whenever I get those comments, usually after a while, either they edit or I ask them to clarify a little bit more and they come out and they say the exact same thing. which is, oh, I thought I had it all exactly right. Turns out I had something that was different. Because again, the exact same code yields the exact same results. I really love that. I really love how if I do things right, I will have the right result. As opposed to this, basically just pulling a lever on some kind of slot machine and basically just pray that whatever the AI gives you actually works. There's a really funny short that just came out on exactly my issue with this kind of programming.
Make a multiplayer flight simulator that's going to make me rich. See, this is all just hype. Engineers are not going anywhere. You can't just one-shot a flight simulator. It's magic! Engineers are going away soon! Now make the planes blue! No, make it realistic like before. More realistic. More realistic. More realistic.
So yeah, that is really, really is the issue. Once again, if you are putting your hands in the randomness of the world, yeah, maybe sometimes you'll get a really great result, but then you pull the lever again because you have to fix some bug or add some tiny thing, and then it gives you something completely different. And then of course, since you have no idea what changed, you have no idea what happened before and afterwards, if you don't know that, then you can't manually just go back to the state where things were good. You just have to, once again, keep pulling that lever and hope that, once again, perhaps the AI will give you the same result. Then hear the video on this topic from Y Combinator. They're a very successful VC. They fund companies worth billions and billions of dollars. But if I had to guess, I would say that the people in this video are more investors / project managers as opposed to being programmers. So I'm curious to hear what they're going to say. The like to dislike ratio is definitely interesting. I've only seen the first few minutes, so let me see the rest.
I mean, I think our sense right now is this isn't a fad. This isn't going away. This is actually the dominant way to code. And if you're not doing it, like, you might just be left behind.
Wow. So yeah, once again, that sounds insane to me. It seems to me that it would be objectively better to know what you're doing as opposed to relying on the randomness of the world of giving you the answer. Like, if you ask me to build a health system, that is something that I've done hundreds of times, so I can easily do that. So I know for a fact that I can build that. It might take me something like 5 minutes to write the code, as opposed to if you ask the prompt to AI, it might take you, let's say, 30 seconds to write the prompt, and then you press a button, and it gives you an answer within like 10 seconds. So if you get lucky, you might get the correct answer within 40 seconds, which would be technically faster than me writing it perfectly exactly like I want it in 5 minutes. But if you don't, then it won't take you another 10, 30 seconds. Maybe you get it on the second time. Maybe it takes you 10 times, maybe it takes you 100 times. But then of course comes the issue that writing the initial code is usually a tiny portion of the time that you mess with that code base. Then the bigger portion of time is actually working with that code base, where you have to refactor, rework things, and add things. And if you know what the code is doing, then you can easily add things onto it. Like, let's say I want to add some kind of event, some kind of function. That's easy. But once again, if you ask the AI and you have no idea what the code is doing, perhaps you ask the AI and perhaps it adds just that one function that you need, or perhaps it modifies everything completely, and all of a sudden you get something that doesn't work. And once again, you gotta pull the slot machine 10 more times until you get something that might work. So yeah, to me, this sounds insane. It sounds objectively better to know what you're doing and just do it, as opposed to just pull the slot machine and hope that it gives you a good result.
And we're partners at Y Combinator. Collectively, we've funded companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars right when it was just an idea and a few people. So today we're talking about vibe coding, which is from a Andre Karpathy post that went viral recently. There's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give in to the vibes, embrace exponentials, and forget that the code even exists.
Yeah, so we surveyed the founders in the current YC batch to get their take on vibe coding. And we essentially asked them a bunch of questions. We asked them, what tools are you using? How has your workflows changed? And sort of generally, where do you think the future of software engineering is going, and how will the role of software engineer change as we get into a world of vibe coding? And we got like some pretty interesting responses. Anyone have any favorite quotes that jumped out from the founders?
I think one of them that I can read verbatim is, I think the role of software engineer will transition to product engineer. Human taste is now more important than ever as code-gen tools make everyone a 10x engineer.
So in theory, I do agree that these AI tools help you get to a prototype much faster than previously, and you don't have to be a software engineer. You can just have a rough understanding and you can probably make a prototype. But there's usually a huge difference between just a working prototype and something that is actually production code. So the only way that this makes sense to me is, yep, you become a 10x engineer just on the prototyping stage, on the very basic prototype. But as soon as you want to turn that into an actual product, once again, I think it makes a lot more sense to have someone who knows what they're doing as opposed to just relying on randomness. I mean, just imagine you have some kind of business, some kind of $10 million business, and you want to add a new feature onto your business, your app, your something, and the only way that you know how to do it is go into the AI, ask it to add the thing, and hope that it works. And if it doesn't work, then you basically just got to keep rolling the dice. That to me seems like a pretty insane way to run a company.
I got one. Abi from Astra said, I don't write code much. I just think and review.
Oh, this sounds awful to me. I mean, this would technically, there's nothing wrong to it. If you're just reviewing code from another human programmer or another AI, if they're both the same quality, technically, I don't have an issue with that. Although personally, I would find that awful. I really enjoy actually writing the code. So the idea that as a programmer, I would just basically be reviewing code from someone else, I think that would be insane. So I don't think I would be good at a place like Google Meta as being a software engineer. Because as far as I know, from what I understand, once you get to that high level, at the most part, you're really just reviewing code that someone else wrote and then adding it to the code base. I really think I would dislike that. I really want to be actually writing code, actually building things, and not just reviewing. So yeah, this one, nothing to do with AI, but yeah, I do not want that.
There's another quote from a different RB from Copycat, who said I am far less attached to my code now, so my decisions on whether we decide to scrap or refactor code are less biased. Since I can code 3 times as fast, it's easy for me to scrap and rewrite if I need to.
See, that's an interesting one. Yeah, if you don't write the code, then you are less attached to it. So you are more okay with throwing that code away, refactoring it, and so on. I can definitely empathize with that, with the idea that you wrote the code, so you're attached to it, so you don't want to destroy it, even if you know that it's meant to be just a throwaway prototype. But I really don't think that the solution to that is to basically put the writing in the hands of AI. I think the solution to that is much more of a personal thing. Just know when you're writing code that is meant to be a throwaway prototype, just know it is meant to be thrown away.
And then I guess the really cool thing about this stuff is it actually parallelizes really well. So Yoav from K60, he says, I write everything with cursor. Sometimes I even have 2 windows of cursor open in parallel, and I prompt them on 2 different features.
Again, another thing that sounds strange to me. This reminds me of people who say they're really good, really efficient because they're really into multitasking. Even though there have been plenty of studies that say that multitasking doesn't really work. The brain can't easily focus on 2 things at the same time. So if you are multitasking, you might tell yourself, oh, I'm really productive, I'm doing 2 things at once. But in reality, you're really just doing 2 things very, very poorly, as opposed to just focusing on one, get it done, focus on another one, get it done. I really don't think in all the games that I've made, in all the code that I've written, I really don't think I've ever thought to myself, okay, I'm doing good, I'm being productive, but I should be making this system and another system at the same time. Even if you are using AI, and even if AI was really great, that still requires you to switch your focus from one system to the other one feature to the other one. You gotta constantly jump back and forth. And again, for most people, multitasking really doesn't work. That really just leads to a net negative. So even in the best case scenario where the AI is absolutely perfect, I still see this as a very strange use case.
Which makes sense. Why not 3? You know, you
Exactly.
could do a lot, actually.
And I think another one that's great is from the founder of Train Loop. He mentions how coding has changed 6 to 1 month ago. 10x speed up 1 month ago to now is 100x speed up, exponential acceleration.
And he says, I'm no longer an engineer. I'm a product person.
Yeah, that's
Now, me personally, I don't really use AI to write code, so I don't really know how much it has actually sped up in the past 6 months. At least in terms of general text generation, I don't think there's been a 100x speed up. Back when ChatGPT came out like 2 years ago, you would ask something and it would give you an answer within a few seconds. Nowadays, it still takes you a few seconds. So I guess perhaps when he says 100x speed up, perhaps it means now it makes fewer mistakes. So it goes back to the whole thing about pulling levers on the slot machine. And now technically you need 100 fewer spins on the slot machine in order to get the thing that you like, the thing that works. So again, fundamentally, that sounds a very strange thing to me. I really don't want randomness. I really want to be able to build things and have them actually work. So if it requires asking the AI more than once to get something, to do something, until it gets to the point where randomness can be taken out of the equation, until then I don't see how the speedups, how these actually make sense. And yeah, I'm no longer an engineer, I'm a product person, which once again, I would go back to the same thing about prototypes versus actually production code. Yeah, for prototypes that might work, but once you got something in production, personally, I would very much want an engineer as opposed to, once again, just rolling the dice and hoping that it works.
And that's certainly a theme that came up in these survey responses, right? This idea of sort of the LLMs are maybe going to push people to choose because the actual writing of the code may become less important. And it's about, do you have taste and you want to solve product problems, or are you an architect and you want to solve systems problems?
Oh, and interestingly, I guess one thing the survey did indicate is that this stuff is terrible at debugging. And so the humans have to do the debugging still. They have to.
I mean, that's funny because debugging is pretty much 90% of programming. So yeah, when it comes to the whole idea that the AI vibe coding is not suitable for debugging, so yeah, it is not suitable for 90% of the programming process.
Figure out, well, what is the code actually doing? Here's a bug. Where's, spot the bug. Where's the code path that, we have some, logic error, just didn't figure this out, right? There doesn't seem to be a way to just tell it debug. You were saying that you have to be very explicit, like as if giving instructions to a first-time software engineer.
So at that point, why not write the code yourself? I fully agree. In order to debug something, you have to know what is going on. So if you didn't write the code initially, you're going to have a really tough time trying to figure out what is going on so you can tell the AI to fix it. And if you go through the trouble of reading it to get an understanding of how it works in order to tell the AI to fix it, if so, then why not get that understanding from the very first time, from the very first go? It just seems like a really insanely inefficient way of writing code. You ask the AI to do something, the AI does something that might or might not work, and if it works, great, you just accept that's done. That's why I say for really tiny things, I can see that working. But for anything where you're going to have to iterate upon and build upon it, eventually it's going to not work. So when it doesn't work, in order to tell the AI that it doesn't work, in order to tell it to fix it, you have to first go through it, understand yourself, then once you understand yourself, then you can instruct the AI in order to figure out how to fix it, and then the AI maybe tries to fix it, maybe not. Again, that really just seems like a very convoluted, extremely inefficient process.
I have to really spoon feed it the instructions to get it to debug stuff, or you can kind of embrace the vibes. I'd say Andre Karpathy style is just like ignore the bug and just like re-roll, just like tell it to try again from scratch. Like it's wild how your coding style changes when actually writing the code becomes 1,000x cheaper. Like as a human, you would never just like blow away something that you'd worked on for a long time and rewrite it from scratch because you had a bug.
Because as a human, you don't have to rewrite from scratch. If you have some kind of bug that affects literally your entire program, then I would say you have a very serious architectural problem. But usually bugs are on one small thing. So if you wrote the code, if you understand how the code works and you find a bug on one specific thing, ideally, you understand how it works so you can fix just that one tiny thing. You don't have to rewrite the entire program. Like if I'm building a game like Flappy Bird, and every time that the bird goes through a pipe, instead of getting just one score, it gets two. If I find that bug, in order to fix that bug, I don't have to remake the entire game from scratch. I don't have to rewrite the entire code. I just go through the part that handles the logic for the score, and I just figure out, oh, okay, here it's doing plus equals 2 instead of plus equals 1.
You'd always fix the bug, but like for the LLM, if you can just like rewrite 1,000 lines of code in like 6 seconds, like,
it doesn't cost
like why not? You know?
Yeah, I guess if you fully just trust the AI, fully just accept everything, then sure, why not? Once again, if every time you come a problem, you need to understand the line of code, then I would say there's a very serious why not. Because if you rewrite 1,000 lines of code, then you've got 1,000 lines of code that you need to re-understand how the whole thing works. So it might be fast at rewriting 1,000 lines of code, but then it takes you even longer if you find some kind of issue and you have to manually understand what the code works. So I guess the only way that this is a positive is if you accept the base premise that vibe coding is somehow good, the idea that you just put all your faith in the AI and hope that the AI does something good. And if the AI always does something good, then I guess based on that, it would work. But it feels we are still very, very far from an AI that is that capable on anything more than a very, very simple problem.
It's kind of like writing, taking the approach of, how people use Midjourney or Playground when you're trying to generate images. Like if there are artifacts or things that I don't like, sometimes I don't even change the prompt. I just click re-roll and I do that 5 times. And sometimes it just works. I'm just like, oh, I can use that now.
Yeah.
Now on the comparisons with image generation, there's always one massive, massive difference between images and programs, which is for an image, it just needs to be, let's say, 99% accurate. If you've got some kind of image and some kind of shirt and the fibers don't actually look perfect on just one tiny thing, then the image as a whole still works. But if you've got a program, 1,000 lines of code, and one of those lines of code is incorrect, then possibly the whole thing does not work. You can't really have a program that is only 99% correct. It has to be 100% correct or it doesn't work. So in an image, you can re-roll because the acceptable error rate is much, much higher than the acceptable error rate on some kind of program.
Which is a very different frame of building systems because you're not building foundationally step by step. You're really doing it from scratch because fundamentally what's going on is like all these tools today are coming from the world of generated code that are in this latent space hidden somewhere. And you have to do it from scratch to find like a different gradient and not get stuck. And then you want to like add a bit of randomness, get it to regenerate. But I do think maybe, I don't know, whatever next generation of O5, maybe we'll get to the point that actually is able to build upon. I mean, as of right now, I think most of it is you need to re-roll and rewrite, but it doesn't build upon it yet. But we haven't seen any of the coding tools right now work well with reasoning. I think we have.
Sure, yeah. Once you get the AI good enough to get to the point where it can actually build a simple system, then build upon that system without having to massively rewrite the whole thing. And you can slowly build pieces on top of one another. once it gets to that point, I can more understand this style of coding. Personally, I would still very much prefer to know what the code is doing as opposed to just asking the AI and hoping that it works. So even when it got to the point where every time you pull the lever on a slot machine, you've got a 90% chance of it working, I would still very much prefer to manually write the code. But yeah, technically if it got to that point, technically that could be a viable option. Although I feel like we are still very, very far away from that. I mean, back when ChatGPT first came out, there were people saying, oh, programmers are going to be obsolete in 3 months. And here we are 2.5 years later. And the tools have definitely improved, definitely, but still very, very far from that sort of AGI, super AGI kind of thing.
What is the estimated code that's being written by LLMs in the current batch?
Hi, this is pretty crazy. So we explicitly asked this question: what % of your code base do you estimate is AI generated? The way I interpreted the question is like of the actual characters in your code base, not including any libraries that you imported, like a percentage of like the characters were like typed by human hands versus like emitted by an LLM. And the crazy thing is 1/4 of the founders said that more than 95% of their code base was AI generated.
Wow.
Which is like an insane statistic.
That does sound insane. The next obvious question would be, are these founders working on things that are in actual production? Or still just making throwaway prototypes, trying to figure out what sticks, what works? But yeah, that's definitely an insane number. I know there are some people that do like using it, but I would have expected the number to be something like 10, 20%. I definitely did not expect something that high. So maybe I'm wrong, or maybe there's something specific to, I'm guessing, software as a service. I'm guessing that's the main kind of companies that they work with. Maybe there are some problems in that area that are much more suitable to AI as opposed to what I work on, game development. I do wonder if that's a thing because, yeah, that number sounds insanely high to me.
And it's not like we funded a bunch of non-technical founders. Like every one of these people is like highly technical, completely capable of building their own product from scratch. A year ago, they would have built their own product from scratch, but now 95% of it is built by an AI.
Except for, maybe it sounds like we have
Oh,
one
yeah.
or two
Two
examples of
that's
people
true. Yeah.
who they're so young that
Yeah.
they learned to code in the last 2 years. So they actually don't know a world where
Yeah.
Cursor didn't exist.
Wow, yeah, that's another thing that personally I find very odd, possibly very negative. Don't think about people learning, quote unquote, to code using these AI tools. So in essence, they're not really learning how to code. They're just learning how to ask questions to the AI, get some kind of code back. Personally, I think AI tools can be very useful for helping you learn how to code, basically asking kind of like a guide. So when you don't understand something, ask the AI to explain it. I think that's a good use case for AI for helping you basically on the learning process. But as soon as you get to the point where you're just asking the AI to do something and you just blindly copy paste, I feel like at that point you're not really learning how to code at all. But then again, it sounds like they're not interested in learning how to code. It sounds like they're interested in learning how to build some kind of product. And technically, if the code works, if the AI does give you something that works, then technically you don't need to know what the code is actually doing. But again, that goes back to the whole thing that I said, where yeah, if you're making something simple, that might work. But as soon as you've got something with a little bit of complexity, as soon as you've got something that requires a little bit of debugging, then at that point, I feel like those people are going to encounter some very rough problems.
Yeah, this is one of my best companies. This batch actually is exactly this. The founders are extremely technical minds, but they're not classically trained in computer science and programming. And they are incredibly productive and able to produce just a ton of like really amazing product. And AI is writing almost the entire thing.
It kind of makes me think a lot of the discourse around sort of Gen Zs are the first digital native that grew up with the internet. This is like the generation that grew up with native AI coding tools, that they skip the classical training of a software engineer and they just do it with the vibe. But they are actually very technical minded. I mean, they have degrees in math and physics.
Yeah.
So they have that raw, let's call it more like system thinking type of mind that you still need. Maybe we should talk a bit about that. It's like, what's still the same and what has changed?
I think this vibe coding will enable people who have those kinds of technical minds, who come from other technical disciplines like math and physics, to become highly productive as programmers much faster than it was in the past. Like I remember there were like coding boot camps, like back in the day, they would try to like retrain physics people into programmers. And then like it didn't work that well because it just takes too long to learn all of the syntax and all of the libraries and all the stuff that you have to know to be really productive. But like now it's a new world.
The code.
Yeah, I agree that these AI tools are really awesome when you have some kind of knowledge in a different domain, but you don't necessarily have programming knowledge. And previously, you would need to hire a programmer or get some programming knowledge yourself in order to build some kind of product, some kind of app, some kind of something. Whereas now with these tools, you can use natural language to get something that sort of works. So once again, for making the initial prototype, I think this can work. I think this can be a great positive. But once you get past the prototyping stage, personally, I would really not want to depend on that kind of quality of code. The same thing where if you make some kind of prototype, some kind of new game that you want to try out, if you make a prototype and you intentionally write the code very quick, very dirty, if so, then I would not want to use that quick and dirty code on some kind of 2-year project. You make it quick and dirty, you test out some kind of game idea, you validate that it works, and then basically refactor, rewrite the whole thing using some proper logic, and then you have a nice code base that you can then build upon for the future.
2 themes we talked about, right? Like one is how, okay, we're all just product people now. Like actually the thing that you need is really great taste and understand what to build. And the second was the area of actually now what's really valuable is to be like a systems thinker and an architect and to really sort of understand the bigger picture. In which case, actually like maybe being a really productive coder, because that's definitely something that always fit my definition of when you're talking about who are great engineers, you know, and like one of the dimensions are they're just really like they can write code really fast.
Yes.
Like maybe that's outdated. Like maybe that's not, if the LLMs are actually really good at writing code quickly.
Right.
And to your point, like now it's actually just cheaper to like reroll and just like write everything from scratch than try and debug. Like the skills might just be completely different.
Problem is, there's like
Personally, I would definitely not say that writing code fast is such a important thing, I would say. I mean, I think it's a nice bonus to be able to just type quickly. I think that's nice. When I think about myself as a programmer, I think of myself more as a problem solver as opposed to a typist. So regardless of vibe coding, regardless of AI or not, I would say if someone is hiring for something speedy as opposed to someone that knows how to solve problems, I would say that is probably the wrong way to hire. But I always work by myself. I never worked in any kind of normal company, so I definitely know nothing about the hiring process.
2 different stages. There's 0 to 1, in which case speed is the only thing that matters. And then to your point about active record and Rails, that battle was actually fought to a standstill because, of course, using active record or Rails allowed you to go from 0 to 1 very quickly. But then what happened at Twitter? It became the fail whale, right?
Yeah.
Like basically, once you get to 1, like 1, that architecture will not get you to $1 billion or $10 billion or $100 billion in valuation or users or whatever. Like it's just not going to actually work. So I think you're going to see the same thing. And then there's nuance in what you just said, right? Like getting 0 to 1 quickly and then being able to scale to 1 billion users are 2 totally different sets. And then I think that might be irreplaceable for now around people. And
yeah, I guess that right there basically sums up my thoughts on this whole thing. Using AI from 0 to 1, I think that's good for building the initial prototype just to validate the idea, validate that it works. But then to go from 1 to 100, you kind of need to know that the whole thing works. You kind of need to know how it works and why it's working. I would definitely hate to be working on a company that is on the 1 to 100 stage and is using this philosophy of vibe coding, of pulling the slot machine and hoping that it works.
I think one key skill that's going to, remain, that's constant. I do think skills of reading code and debugging are maxim. It's like you have to have the taste and enough training to know that the LLM is spitting bad stuff or good stuff. So like bad code or good. And I think you can see it clearly sometimes if a candidate is using the tools and there's actually a reasonable solution that the LLM outputs, and then the candidate is like, oh, this is actually bad. That is a sign. So I think knowing kind of more the higher level thinking to know what is good versus bad. In order to do good vibe coding, you still need to have the taste and you still need that kind of classical train, maybe not necessarily classical train, but enough knowledge to judge what's good versus bad.
So it sounds like there's no benefit to vibe coding. If you have to be skilled enough to know that the AI is telling you something good, if you have the knowledge to know that it's good, why not just build it yourself from scratch the first time? That's one part that really makes me, I don't see the benefit. If you have no idea what you're doing, if you have no idea what the AI is doing, then you're going to encounter a million issues. And if you do have knowledge to know what you're doing, why would you put your hands on this slot machine as opposed to just writing the code yourself? I guess I really don't get the pros and cons and how that is somehow positive.
it sort of crept up on us, actually.
Yeah, it was like somebody dropped some giant beanstalk seeds at night. We woke up in the morning and there it was like, whoa,
What's going on? So, I mean, I think our sense right now is this isn't a fad. This isn't going away. This is actually the dominant way to code. And if you're not doing it, like you might just be left behind. This is just here to stay. And, vibe coding is not a fad. It's time to accelerate. So with that, we'll see you guys for the next light cone.
Yeah. Again, fundamentally, I really have a problem with putting my work in the hands of a slot machine. I really want to be able to know that I wrote something and that it works because I know that it works. So yeah, I would definitely not say this is the future. I would definitely say the future still remains having knowledge and knowing what you're doing. But yeah, going back to the original post, for doing throwaway weekend projects, for doing things that are really, really tiny, like if you want to do a JavaScript web scraper or make an Arduino flashing lights, if you want to do something very tiny, then yeah, I can see this working. Just put all your faith in the AI, roll the slot machine, and hope that it works. And on very, very tiny use cases, chances are it might actually work. But for anything more serious than that, yeah, this sounds insane to me. Like I said, personally, the thing that I love most about programming is how it's deterministic. The same code will always yield the exact same output. I really love that. I really love knowing. I really love knowing that if the code has a bug, it is because the code is wrong in some way. And the act of debugging is basically just figuring out what is wrong with the code. And if I know what the code is doing, then I can look into it and try to fix it. But if I'm just vibe coding, if I'm just asking the AI for something, and I have no knowledge on what the code is actually doing, if so, then at that point, my only option is just to go back to the AI, pull the slot machine once again, and hope that this time it works. And for me personally, I definitely do not want that kind of randomness in my work. But that's just me. I mean, apparently, based on what they said, some founders are using 95% of their code being written with AI. So perhaps I'm wrong, perhaps I'm in my own bubble. Personally, I definitely do intend to continue writing code manually, as it were, for the foreseeable future. But yeah, as these AIs improve, maybe perhaps one day, maybe this kind of way won't work. I don't see it happening anytime soon, but yeah, who knows. Either way, very interesting topic. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you find this kind of vibe coding to be something appealing? Or do you, like me, also prefer knowing how the code works and that it actually works? Do let me know in the comments. Also, if you want to stay up to date with what's going on in the industry, check out my Game Dev Report newsletter. Alright, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.